I'd just like to make the point that we're very fortunate that His Majesty has allowed us to use Buckingham Palace for this event, and I need to say that.
It is terrible. After 50 years behind closed doors, the fate of a kingdom is decided not with a speech, not with a crown, not even with a decree. Sometimes it is a chair. This week, as the final state banquet seating plan crossed the palace desks, one change sent a silent shockwave through the royal household. Queen Camilla was removed from King Charles's immediate side, and Princess Anne was placed beside him instead. Before we step into the shadows of what this truly means for the monarchy, make sure to subscribe, because this story is only just beginning to breathe. Charles did not speak when the final card reached him. He read the names once, then again, as if the paper had turned cold in his hands. A state banquet is a formal royal dinner held for visiting leaders, draped in glitter and diplomacy. But inside palace life, it is never just about food or speeches. Every seat sends a message. Every position tells the world who is trusted, protected, and closest to power. That is why this change mattered. Anne had not been moved nearer to the king by accident. Camilla had not been moved away by confusion. The seating arrangement had become a declaration. Camilla received the update in private. For a moment, she did not react. She held the note, eyes fixed on the line where her place should have been. The queen consort understood the wound beneath the wording. This was not a practical adjustment. This was proximity being taken where proximity meant strength. She had stood beside Charles through judgment, through scandal, through years of silence. Yet now, another woman would sit where the world expected her. Anne heard the news differently. No grand announcement came. No aide dressed it up with ceremony. One official stepped close and said, "Ma'am, His Majesty will require you at his side." She absorbed the sentence without triumph. The princess had spent a lifetime refusing drama, which made the moment sharper. She did not ask why Camilla had been moved. She did not ask who approved it. She accepted the duty because Anne knew that when the crown calls, emotion waits outside. Then came the quiet gesture that made the decision feel final. An aide opened the rehearsal folder, removed Camilla's place card, and slid it beneath papers. No one raised a voice. No one needed to. Charles watched and understood that the palace had crossed a line it could not uncross. What looked like a small change had become a silent test of loyalty. And the king knew the answer would wound someone before the evening ended. And once that chair moved, everyone inside the palace began asking the same dangerous question: who had become indispensable to the king, and who had quietly been pushed away? To the public, the banquet was supposed to be polished silver, diplomatic smiles, and royal tradition. But behind the doors, three people carried three very different storms. Charles needed steadiness. Camilla needed recognition. Anne needed nothing at all, which made her the most dangerous figure in the room. The moment her name moved beside the king, the emotional balance of the palace changed. Charles felt the pressure before anyone said it aloud. He knew a state banquet was not simply dinner under chandeliers. It was a national performance where the monarchy showed visiting leaders, diplomats, and the watching public that the crown remained stable. Every gesture mattered. Every companion mattered. And for a king already carrying the weight of age, illness, family fracture, and public doubt, the person beside him had to look unshakable. He needed calm. He needed discipline. He needed someone who would not pull the evening into private emotion. Camilla understood the danger of distance better than anyone. Her public place had always depended on being seen near Charles during the grandest royal moments, not because she lacked title, but because title alone was never enough for her. She needed the image. She needed the reassurance that the room still accepted her as the woman closest to the monarch. When that closeness shifted, even slightly, it was not a small embarrassment. It was a warning. It told the palace that her position could still be measured, adjusted, and quietly reduced. Charles sat alone before the banquet briefing, staring at the protocol sheet as if it had become a confession. Protocol, the rulebook of royal order, the system that decides who stands where, walks first, sits closest, and carries the weight of public meaning. He saw Anne's name beside his and knew Camilla would feel the blow before the night even began. Yet he did not cross it out. He did not call the aide back. That silence became its own decision. Camilla's composure cracked in the smallest possible way. A dresser asked whether her jewels should match the king's table position, and for one painful second, the question hung in the room like a mistake no one dared correct. She answered softly that her position had changed. The words were controlled, but the hurt beneath them was not. She had survived years of judgment to stand beside Charles, and now Anne would occupy the place that spoke louder than any announcement. Anne did not celebrate. She folded the revised schedule, placed it in her handbag, and prepared as if duty had simply handed her another burden. But a courtier noticed something even colder. Charles had been warned that the optics would be explosive, yet he still refused to reverse the arrangement. That meant the replacement was not sudden. It had roots, and those roots led back to a private trigger the palace had tried to bury. To understand why Anne was placed at the king's side, the story must move backward to the moment Camilla lost something far more fragile than a seat: trust. Every royal rupture has a beginning, but not every beginning looks dramatic while it is happening. This one began at a private diplomatic reception 3 nights before the banquet when a remark, a pause, and a closed door changed the temperature inside the palace. By the next morning, the seating plan was no longer a formality. It had become a message. Camilla did not arrive that evening expecting a confrontation. She walked into the reception believing the order of the week was already understood, and that her place beside Charles would remain untouched. Yet the trouble began with one question about the formal receiving line, the carefully arranged moment when royals greet important guests in a set order before an official event. It mattered because the receiving line tells visitors who represents the crown, who stands closest to the monarch, and who carries authority in the room. Anne answered first, quietly confirming that she would accompany Charles through part of the greeting sequence. Camilla cut across her before the sentence had settled. She said the king would not need extra support because she would be there. The words sounded polished, but the meaning struck hard. It was not simply a disagreement over movement. It was a challenge in front of senior guests, and everyone who heard it understood the danger. Anne stayed still, but her silence sharpened. She did not raise her voice. She did not defend herself. She allowed the moment to expose itself. Charles watched the exchange and felt the room change around him. He knew the issue was no longer about comfort or custom. It had touched the deeper question of who could speak for the crown when pressure gathered around him. Later, he entered his study and closed the door before aides could follow. That detail mattered. Charles often leaned on officials during delicate moments, but this time he shut the world out. The wound had reached him personally because Camilla had not merely interrupted Anne. She had made uncertainty visible. By morning, the incident had entered the system. A private note from the reception was placed into the king's red box, the official dispatch container used to carry papers requiring the monarch's personal attention. The note summarized the breach in one chilling phrase: a visible confusion of authority. Those 5 words changed everything. They turned a tense exchange into a royal problem. They gave the seating change a reason. They made Anne's new position beside Charles feel less like preference and more like correction. Camilla learned that the reception had become part of the decision, and her hurt turned colder. She did not blame the aides. She did not ask for the note to disappear. Instead, she asked for Anne directly because the queen consort understood that the battle had moved beyond paper. It had become personal, and someone would have to say aloud what the palace had already decided in silence. And that request led to the confrontation the palace feared most. 2 royal women, 1 wounded king, and a truth no one could soften. The confrontation did not happen in a ballroom or before cameras. It happened in a smaller room where the air felt heavier because there was nowhere to perform. Camilla entered expecting explanation. Anne stood waiting with the stillness of someone who had already accepted the consequences. And Charles, caught between loyalty and monarchy, understood that whatever was said next could not be taken back. Camilla stepped into the private sitting room with her composure pulled tight, but the hurt had already reached her voice before she spoke. A private sitting room is one of the palace's quieter spaces, used for conversations too sensitive for offices and too personal for official chambers. It was a family wound being handled behind closed doors where rank could not fully protect anyone. Charles had allowed the meeting because he believed silence would make the injury deeper. He knew Camilla would feel punished. He knew Anne would feel accused. And he knew the crown had placed all three of them in a position where no answer could sound kind. Camilla looked at Anne and asked the question that had been building since the altered seating plan reached her. Was this your doing? The words were sharp, but the pain underneath them was sharper. She was not simply asking whether Anne wanted the chair beside Charles. She was asking whether Anne had allowed the palace to turn her into proof that Camilla could be moved aside. The queen consort had spent years fighting for legitimacy. Yet in that room, she felt the old uncertainty return, cold and humiliating. Anne did not flinch. She did not answer quickly. She allowed the accusation to settle because rushing would have made it sound like guilt. Anne finally replied with the steadiness that made the decision so difficult to challenge. She told Camilla she had not asked for the chair, but she would not refuse the king if he needed calm beside him. That sentence cut deeper than denial because it carried no vanity. Anne was not claiming victory. She was accepting duty. Charles heard it and lowered his eyes because the truth was suddenly impossible to soften. He admitted the change had come after the reception incident raised concerns about discipline around him. Public discipline in palace language meant the visible order and control that protects the monarch from appearing weak, confused, or divided. Camilla understood then that the decision was not about Anne replacing her socially. It was worse than that. Anne was being trusted ceremonially where Camilla no longer was. The chair beside Charles had become a test of reliability, and Camilla had discovered the result only after others had already judged it. Charles reached for his pen, paused, and set it down with a quiet finality that made the whole room still. Then he said the seating would remain unchanged. That single pen striking the table became the sound of finality, but behind it stood a deeper force than personal preference. Royal power rarely announces itself loudly. It moves through protocol sheets, advisory notes, and the quiet language of precedents. By the time Camilla challenged the seating change, the machinery had already turned. Charles was not merely choosing between two women beside him. He was responding to a warning from the institution that had protected kings and queens long before this family wound opened. Charles understood the danger of ignoring that warning. Palace protocol officials had looked at the banquet and seen more than a formal dinner. They saw a test of control. Protocol means the palace rule system that decides rank, order, seating, movement, and who appears closest to the monarch during official moments. In ordinary times, those details could seem cold. In a sensitive week, they became protection. The king needed visible stability beside him, not just personal comfort. He needed someone whose presence would calm the room before anyone questioned him. Anne became the answer because her record carried a force Camilla could not easily challenge. The princess had spent decades doing the hardest work without demanding applause. She was disciplined, restrained, and almost impossible to rattle. That mattered because the banquet was not only about friendship with foreign guests. It was about showing that the crown still had order at its center. Anne did not need to be liked to be trusted. She did not need to dominate a room to steady it. And in that brutal palace calculation, restraint became power. Charles sat with the revised seating page while a senior courtier watched from across the room. The monarch picked up his pen, paused over the line, and initialed the change. The courtier saw no victory in his face, only sadness. That sadness mattered because Charles was not enjoying Camilla's displacement. He was accepting it. The king asked whether she would be humiliated, and the silence that followed answered before any official could. Everyone knew the image would cut deeply. Everyone knew she would understand it instantly. Then the advisory note gave the decision its hardest edge. The phrase was simple: the king must be flanked by unquestioned steadiness. Those words carried the cold weight of institutional judgment. They did not accuse Camilla directly, but they left no room for comfort. Anne's name had not been proposed as punishment. It had been proposed as protection. That made the decision almost impossible to reverse, because challenging it would mean arguing against Charles's public strength. Camilla's place began changing before she even entered the banquet. First came the seating, then the procession order, then the quiet adjustments no one explained unless forced. And once accepted, it spread. What began as a private correction now moved toward public consequence, and the queen consort would feel it first in the most personal room of all. When the invisible decision finally became visible, the first fracture appeared not in the banquet hall, but in Camilla's own preparation room. Her gown had been pressed. Her necklace had been selected. Her evening schedule had been laid out with the confidence of routine. Then one amended card arrived and the room changed. Nothing shattered. No one shouted. But everyone present understood that the queen's place beside the king had been taken. Camilla sat still as the altered instructions were brought in, and the quiet around her became more painful than any raised voice. The dressing room was supposed to be a place of preparation where every detail was arranged before a royal appeared in public. That mattered because preparation was control. It allowed the monarchy to make uncertainty look effortless. But now the staff were not simply adjusting fabric, timing, or jewels. They were adjusting humiliation. Her entrance had changed. Her table position had changed. Her nearness to Charles, the very thing that made her role feel secure, had been moved into someone else's hands. An aide reached for the tray beside her gloves and removed the original seating card. Camilla watched without speaking. That small piece of paper had carried more than her name. It had carried recognition. It had told the room that she remained the woman closest to the king at one of the most important ceremonial moments of the week. Now it disappeared beneath a revised folder, and the queen consort understood that the palace was not correcting an error. It was enforcing a decision. Camilla finally asked the question that everyone had been trying to avoid. Had Charles approved it himself? The answer came softly, but it landed like a verdict. Yes, the king had approved it. Her face changed then, not with anger first, but with hurt. Anger would have protected her. Hurt exposed her. She had accepted public judgment before, but this wound came from inside the life she had fought to stand beside. Charles had not merely allowed officials to move her. He had permitted Anne to become the steadier presence beside him. The revised procession order made the truth impossible to hide. A procession order is the formal sequence deciding who enters, walks, and appears closest during a royal ceremony. In this new order, Anne would move nearer to Charles during the most watched and symbolically charged moments, while Camilla's position shifted away from the center. That meant the replacement could not be disguised as a seating detail. It would be felt in movement. It would be understood in timing. It would be read before a single word was spoken. Staff were instructed not to discuss the alteration, and that secrecy only proved how explosive the palace knew it had become. Camilla rose with dignity, but dignity did not erase the sting. The evening had not yet begun, and already the cost had reached her. Before the doors opened and the world saw the new arrangement, Charles and Anne found themselves alone for a moment. No protocol could control that turning point. It came without witnesses, without aides, and without ceremony. Charles stood near the corridor before the banquet, carrying the exhaustion of a man who knew every visible choice would be judged. Anne did not soften the moment with false reassurance. She did what she had always done. She told him the truth simply, firmly, and without demanding anything in return. Charles felt the silence pressing around him before the doors opened. He had faced public duty all his life, but this moment carried a different kind of weight. The corridor was not important because of its decoration or its place in the palace. It mattered because it was the last private space before a public signal became permanent. Once Charles stepped forward with Anne closer than Camilla, the decision would no longer belong to paper advisors or quiet rooms. It would belong to history, and history rarely forgives weakness. Anne understood that better than most. She knew Camilla would be hurt. She knew the queen consort would read every inch of distance as judgment, and Anne did not pretend otherwise. But she also knew why Charles could not appear uncertain. A monarch's public appearance is not just personal presence. It is the way the crown communicates strength when words are not enough. During a state banquet, the person beside the king becomes part of that message. Charles needed someone who would steady the room, not deepen its questions. Charles turned to Anne and let the private sadness escape. "I never wanted this to look cruel," he said. The words carried the ache of a husband, not just the burden of a king. He was not blind to Camilla's pain. He was not untouched by the humiliation she would feel. But the tragedy of monarchy is that love can suffer even when duty wins. Charles had chosen the safer symbol, and still the cost sat heavily on him. Anne answered without softness, but not without care. She told him cruelty would be allowing confusion to stand beside him when clarity was needed most. That sentence struck at the heart of the entire crisis. Anne was not attacking Camilla. She was numbing the danger. If the palace had allowed uncertainty to remain visible, Charles would have looked divided before the world. And for a king already surrounded by pressure, division could become weakness faster than anyone expected. Charles then admitted the truth that changed the meaning of the replacement. He had chosen Anne because she never asked him to choose her. That was the difference. Camilla needed recognition. Anne carried duty. One sought reassurance. The other absorbed responsibility. The princess adjusted her gloves, not like someone claiming victory, but like someone accepting a burden no one else could safely carry that night. When the doors finally opened, the palace did not need to explain the shift. The arrangement spoke for itself. Charles stepped forward with Anne as the steadier force beside him, and Camilla's absence from that central position became impossible to ignore. And by morning, that image had escaped the palace walls and become the defining public symbol of the week. The public did not need a palace statement to understand what had happened. One image was enough. Charles seated with Anne beside him. Camilla placed away from the king's immediate side, her expression controlled but unmistakably strained. By sunrise, the banquet was no longer being discussed as diplomacy. It had become a national reading of loyalty, power, and royal survival. Camilla saw the coverage before the palace could soften it. The official language called the arrangement protocol, a word used to describe the rules of royal order, seating, movement, and ceremonial rank. But no carefully chosen phrase could erase what people had already seen. Charles had been placed with Anne at his side, and Camilla had been shifted away from the center of meaning. That mattered because royal seating is never just furniture. It is a public map of trust. It tells the nation who stands closest when the crown feels pressure. Charles watched the morning broadcast in silence, and the quiet around him felt heavier than any headline. He knew the image had hurt Camilla. He also knew it had done exactly what the palace needed it to do. It placed Anne beside him as a symbol of discipline, while the queen consort became part of a story she never wanted written. The success of the monarchy had come at the cost of private pain, and Charles could not pretend otherwise. Camilla turned the newspaper over before finishing the headline. That single movement carried more emotion than a public statement ever could. On the front page, Anne sat beside Charles beneath the words, "The king's steady hand," while Camilla appeared at the edge of the photograph, half shadowed by candlelight. The headline did not insult her directly. That made it worse. It praised Anne in a way that made Camilla's distance impossible to ignore. Anne did not chase the attention that followed. She understood the danger of being turned into a weapon in someone else's marriage. Yet her calm only strengthened the public reading. Outside Buckingham Palace, a small crowd gathered near the gates, and the whispers split in two directions. Some praised Anne's return to prominence, calling her the royal family's iron spine. Others said Camilla had been publicly diminished, not by scandal but by placement. And that was the brutal part. No accusation was needed. The order of the room had said enough. By midday, the palace response grew tighter. Officials kept repeating that the arrangement reflected ceremonial needs, but the public had already moved past explanation. Charles, Camilla, and Anne had become symbols in a bigger argument about what the monarchy protects first: personal loyalty or public strength. And behind all the noise, the most painful truth remained private. The photograph belonged to the world, but the wound belonged to them. When the noise faded, what remained was not scandal, but a brutal emotional verdict about duty, marriage, and the monarchy's oldest rule. In the end, the banquet was not remembered for the menu, the speeches, or the glittering table. That chair became the clearest message of the week. Affection can comfort a monarch, but steadiness protects a reign. And in that moment, Princess Anne did not replace Camilla as a wife. She replaced uncertainty as a royal risk. Charles understood the meaning before anyone dared say it plainly. Anne's placement beside him had become the defining symbolic act of the banquet, not because she demanded attention, but because she made the crown look steady at the exact moment it could not afford doubt. The crown means the monarchy as an institution, the power, duty, and public trust carried by the sovereign beyond personal feelings. That mattered because this was never only about a dinner. It was about whether the king appeared protected, disciplined, and unshaken in front of the world. Camilla felt the cost in the quiet after the applause faded. She had not been stripped of title, and she had not been publicly condemned. Yet the wound was sharper because it came through placement, through distance, through the silent language royals understand better than anyone. The queen consort left with dignity, but dignity did not hide the pain. She avoided looking back toward the king's chair because that chair had already spoken. It had said Anne was trusted in the center while she had been moved to the edge of the moment. Charles looked across the room and knew peace at home had been damaged. He had chosen the person who made him look strongest, not the person whose absence would hurt him least. That was the brutal emotional truth. The monarch did not choose against Camilla out of revenge. He chose Anne because the palace believed he needed unquestioned steadiness beside him. Institutional self-preservation means protecting the survival and image of the monarchy before protecting private comfort. And that cold rule had shaped everything. Anne's power revealed itself through restraint. She did not reach for the center. She did not turn the evening into victory. She became central because she never demanded to be central, and that made her presence impossible to dismiss. Charles needed that calm. Camilla suffered because of it, and the monarchy survived the night by proving the oldest truth of royal life. When cornered, it protects the throne before it protects the heart. The story closes with one image: Charles at the center and steady beside him, Camilla dignified but distant, and a monarchy reminding everyone that love may stand near the throne but duty sits beside it. Thanks for watching.